Hi everyone. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. Hopefully the sound quality is going to be sufficient for this Patreon episode. I should introduce myself. My name is Glenn Cook. I am going to go through the dancing bear procedure with everybody. This is something that I was not intentionally planning on doing. It was just some mucking around that I was doing with Ladybug. We were playing one day and we got into a series of shape behaviours which seemed to be quite interesting. I was having some fun with them and I kind of thought to myself, what am I going to do with this? Where is this all going? And one thing led to another, and like most things, sometimes they start off with a plan, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're just spontaneous and they evolve from there. However, during my time with NDTF, I was thinking to myself, I ask a lot of students to teach some of these, and yet it's been quite a while since I've taught my own dogs to do it. Formerly, I had a Rottweiler called Biff who used to help me with the NDTF, and I used to take him out and do a lot of work with him, and unfortunately he passed away quite some years ago. So he would go to a cupboard and open the cupboard, and he would take a item out of there, whatever item it is that was in there, and he'd bring it over to me. So quite a few generations of NDTF got to watch him do that. However, it was, as I said, it's a bit of a shame how we seem to outlive our dogs 10 to 1. It's good for us, I guess, but not for our beloved dogs. However, I want to go through this procedure with you since you went through the introduction already. I hope you enjoyed that. I was just trying to have a bit of fun with that just to make it a little bit interesting. I do want to go through some of the terms of training with you though, because this is something that we're going to be bringing up throughout the procedure or throughout the episode, so we can discuss terms. There's been times where people have said to me that terms are not important. People who have been having dialogue with me in and outside of what we're doing here, they've said, having qualifications isn't important. You can still be a dog trainer. Knowing terms isn't important. You can still train dogs. I agree with all of that. I've met people who have got no qualifications, have got nothing to their name. They've never ever been to any school with or any formalised seminar or anything like that, and yet I've seen work that they've done and it's been pretty breathtaking. I've seen people who do have qualifications, who have been to almost every seminar there is, who read books continuously, who constantly upgrade their knowledge, and yet they're not producing anything yet of quality. They haven't gone into any trials, but they don't want to either. And it's not a necessity that you have to. It doesn't mean that you have to do any of this. So the terms that we're going to be talking through are terms that I'm used to using. There's a discrepancy on terms sometimes. Sometimes people say that the terms that you're using are incorrect, or they're not the same ones I'm using. A lot of times there'll be variations in terms. That's okay as well. You're allowed to have variations in terms. For example, I know some people who say operant conditioning and other people say instrumental conditioning, thinking that they're two different things, when in fact it's the same thing explained differently. Same thing with classical conditioning, and other people call it Pavlovian conditioning. Again, same thing explained differently. It's quite okay. So why don't we jump into the terms? I'm going to shoot them up on the screen so we can have a bit of a look at them. So the terms used in training that we're going to use during this presentation are acquisition, marking, free shaping, shaping, chaining, luring, capturing, moulding, the matrix of motivation, and a termination cue. So let's start with acquisition. So acquisition is simply acquisition means new or added. Some trainers use this term when creating a classical response to the marker of choice. For example, once you and your dog have a reliable response to your marker, it can now be used as a tool that reliably predicts the primary reinforcer, food in most applications. So when we're talking about acquisition, people saying, well, what do you mean? Acquisition to what? So let's say, for example, you want to use a whistle. Well, the dog needs to understand that that whistle actually means something, that it actually has a classical connection to it, and it also has an operant connection to it as well. It knows that it has a classical response to it in the effect that it immediately stops what it's doing, and if that's what you've trained it to do, for example, if you blow the whistle, or if we're going to jump into clickers, or if you click the clicker and it's used as an appetitive response, appetitive mean positive, if you use it as an appetitive response, the dog should, in most training circumstances, stop what it's doing and run back to you for reward. You could use that same situation, you could use a whistle or a clicker as punishment if you so desire. I wouldn't recommend it. However, it could be used as punishment, a conditioned punisher, that when they hear it, they feel that they're being punished. Okay, so they have a classical response to it, but they also have an operant response to it as well, where they realize that I better stop doing what I'm doing or else I'm going to be punished. So in that aspect, we're going to talk about it in the positive aspect because I think that's the preferable and the sensible choice to use. So let's start with something that most people are using, and that is a mechanical device, the clicker, okay, which is one of these. Okay, so we can have a clicker, we can use a verbal cue such as yes. People have arguments backwards and forwards. You'll hear many trainers. This has been a debate ever since I've been involved in training, and Karen Pryor really popularized this concept, which is the clicker, the mechanical side of it, where there has been preferences to using the clicker. People have said it's a better choice all round. I'm not going to argue. People do what they want to do. My main aspect in all of this is that we benefit what's best for us and communicates most effectively to the dog. I think that anybody worth their salt in this industry would agree that as long as the dog understands what you're trying to communicate and it's quite clear to it, then you're effectively doing what you need to do. And we'll discuss more on that as we start going through. So let's keep going with some of these terms. Another term that I want to throw up here is marking. As previously mentioned, once you have acquisition of your verbal or mechanical tool, you can now use it to precisely indicate to the dog whether it will be rewarded or in some cases punished. Markers should always reliably predict the consequences of the behaviour. So many of you are veterans of this. You probably heard many of the sessions that you've done with Pat. Hopefully you have. If you haven't, it's a good time now to skip back and listen to some of those as well. Pat will explain things differently than I will. We agree on almost everything. We have a variation of ways that we like to do things ourselves. Through the NDTF, we explain things differently. That's quite okay. As I said, the main criteria is that you are still using correct terminology and the dog understands what you want. So for example, let's say we've got this clicker, this device, okay, or a whistle or a yes command, or not yes command, the cue yes. If you're introducing this, initially when you say that, that's going to be neutral stimulus to the dog. So the first time the dog ever hears this, it's not going to understand what it means, okay? However, after a period of time, what the dog will start to understand is that when it hears that, and because we've been pairing it with food, after a period of time, what's going to happen is the dog will start seeing this and understanding that this sound reliably predicts the delivery of food. Now, there's a time delineation of what people say it should occur in. Some people are saying that it should happen within, let's say, 1.2 seconds. Some people are saying 1.6 seconds. I'm saying comfortably, if you're doing that within 2 seconds, you're going to be fine. And if we count that off, like let's say, for example, I've got a treat pouch on my side, okay, and I click 1,000 to 1,000. If you don't think that's fast enough to get food comfortably and sensibly out of your treat pouch and into the dog's mouth, I think you're severely mistaken. So don't rush. I've seen a lot of people trying to do stupid things like trying to get that 1.2 seconds because they hear people saying how important that is. Well, outside of a controlled environment such as a lab or anything like that, I think that it's just a little bit silly. So what I think you should do is concentrate on being effective with it rather than spilling treats all over the ground. And guys, please, this is one thing that drives me absolutely crazy. If you're getting a treat pouch, please get one that is sensible. I've seen people come to training centres and they've got these tiny weeny little training pouches. It's barely enough space to get their hands into. I know we're sort of jumping off to the side here, but they barely enough can get their hands into it. They try and wedge their hand into it. They scoop out a bunch of treats, and by the time they pull it out, it's like popcorn exploding out of a machine. There's treats going everywhere. So do yourself a don't do yourself a mischief and get one of those. Do yourself a service and get yourself a decent treat pouch, something that you can open and close. I like the ones with a nice latch that can open and close easy. Get whatever you want, just make sure it's something sensible that you can get your hands in and out. So we've got our neutral stimuli that's now a conditioned stimulus, because over a period of time we've been pairing a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned reinforcer. Okay, food doesn't have to be conditioned. Dogs know what that is. It's genetically hardwired for babies to seek out food. Okay, not so much in humans need to be guided to it, but if you ever watch puppies or horses or cows or anything like that, any field or predatory style of animal, they immediately start swimming towards their mother's teat, okay, to seek out sustenance. So we don't have to teach that. It's an unconditioned reinforcer, okay? But after a period of time, we pair the two of these together, the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned reinforcer, okay, this becomes a conditioned stimulus. It starts to mean the same thing. It has the same understanding. So when they hear this, it reliably predicts it's coming, all right? So they run back and they look to you to offer the food to them. So you should be making sure that's a clear example of what's going to happen with your dog when you're using marking. Let's jump into the next one, shall we? So we're going to talk about free shaping. Most agree in the training field that the term free shaping is indicative of the learner doing a random desirable behaviour, which is then marked. It is then up to the learner to explore more about that behaviour to induce more rewards. When we start to get into the program, when I start showing you what Ladybug's doing, I'm going to narrate while I'm showing you some of the videos. There's quite a few times where I brought her into an environment. After I taught her some skills, I brought her into my office. I had a fit ball lying on the ground, one of those medicine balls, not a fit ball, a medicine ball. And I had that laying on the ground, and when Ladybug saw it, she ran over to investigate it. As that was happening, I thought to myself, this is a good time to mark it. So I marked it. She ran over towards me. She grabbed her treat, and of course that encouraged her to start wanting to investigate it further. She's been involved in this process before. We've played lots of games with her. There's a video that I'll probably show you during this presentation where I taught her to run over and investigate a line on the ground in front of NDTF students. So what we were doing was we were in the shed. We were talking about how to teach dogs complex skills, how to shape a behaviour, and just for shits and giggles, I thought to myself, why don't we teach her how to do something random, something that most people wouldn't teach to do? In most cases in NDTF, we teach the dogs to press light switches, or we teach them to pick up dumbbells or something like that. However, I thought to myself, why don't I teach something that has like you can't visibly see it or detect it, but it'd be interesting to see her take on it. I wanted to see how the communication would evolve between myself and her. So we started to teach her when she came into the room, when she started to get into proximity. It's like playing hot potato, cold potato. She went over towards the line and marked her. Of course, she ran over towards me to get the treat. She had no clue or concept of what we were trying to do. This is completely free shaped. She was just in the vicinity of where the line was. It was an intersection of cracks on the concrete. You'll see it if I put up the video. She was intrigued by it. She wanted to go back over to that area. She didn't know whether she should be looking at the table, whether she should be looking up in the sky. She was just moving around randomly. Now, I didn't get the first time we ever did it, but after a period of time when it started to impregnate into her mind what it actually was, we started to video it then, because it was quite intriguing for me that she knew what this was all about. And I thought, this is actually interesting. It should be documented. So after a period of time, I think the video that I am going to show you, the one that I did capture, was one that I thought to myself, this is a good time to pair the behaviour, because she's starting to progress to the point where she understands she needs to go and seek out the line and go and indicate on it. So she would, where that line was, she'd then go and look towards it. Sometimes she'd even rest her face against it. which I thought was quite good. It was a good indication of a free shaping exercise that just transformed into something fascinating. So free shaping is it's a more recent term that's been used. Some people basically say that free shaping is a contrived way of saying it's a shaping exercise. Again, I'm not here to argue what terms people want to use, what terms people don't want to use. If you don't want to use these terms, that's fine. If you do want to use them, the importance of terms, as we were saying before, the importance of terms is if you're going to educate other people, like if you're going to teach people, then I think it's important to know terminology so you can then pass it on correctly. If you're talking with your peers, if you're planning to write any literature, then terminology and the correct sciences around it should be something that is strongly considered. Otherwise, you'll find yourself at the topic of hot debate all the time. So it doesn't hurt to know terminology. I encourage people to use it. Some people in the past, as I've said before, have used the example of I can play music but I can't read it, and other people have said I can read music but I can't play it. So that's not a problem for some people. Some people have got an ear for music and they're absolutely fantastic musicians. Some people are terrible musicians, yet you show them sheet music and they can read it all day long. I think it's more practical to have knowledge in both of them to be a good musician and to be able to read music as well. But let's jump back on the term, shall we? So the other one we're going to talk about is shaping. This is the one that's thrown around most often. Shaping allows for many tools and techniques to craft a behaviour. Until the behaviour is learned, the teacher will need to utilise the correct daily increments in order not to make the lesson confusing or overstressful. I want to talk to you about the word increments as well. Incremental stages are a measurement in time. So, for example, one of the things that stresses most students out that I talk to when we're doing the NDTF course, or even seminars, or I'm watching people training their dogs in private lessons, is they believe in their heart and soul that they are doing the correct increments, like they are explaining the situation exactly as it needs to be explained to the dog. However, what I'm finding is when I'm looking at it is the dog simply doesn't understand it. Like they've gone, instead of going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, they've gone from A to F, and they've skipped out all that vital information between it. They think that is clearly legible, what they've done. They believe that should have been understood, that the dog should have picked that up. However, in many cases, that's entirely not true. The dog doesn't understand what it's doing. So I encourage people that when you are thinking about doing any shaping exercises, that you break everything down. And if you ever read the book The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, he often talks about chunking things down, like breaking them up into segments, and that's when we start to refer to things as being incremental. So increments are very important, otherwise a lot of the information gets missed, a lot of frustration occurs. You find that it's a very stressful situation, not only for yourself but also for the dog. And if the dog finds that teaching a complex skill or a skill is stressful, they'll learn that skill is actually negative, that there's no advantage to doing it, and they'll want to bow out of it. And that's a terrible, that's almost a sin in training, is that you've done something which made the dog feel lacking enthusiasm. It's destroyed its hope in the exercise. So it basically sees it as a form of punishment. So just be careful with that type of thing. Let's return to the terms. The next one I want to talk about is chaining. Chaining occurs both forward and backwards. Back chaining is the easier of the two, as it is predictive in that the final skill is taught first and each new skill predicts the next, and so on. Forward chaining is more difficult in that there is no prediction for the final skill. So the exercise of what we done here was taught through forward chaining, and the reason was I didn't have any other option. If I had the option to teach through back chaining, or some people, again, to use a different term, use reverse chaining. If I had the opportunity to do that, I certainly would, because I find that easier on the dog, and it's easier as a training platform as well. If the dog can see the predictive skill that you've been teaching in a reverse order, they then have familiarity with the skill, and they go, oh, I understand what's coming up next, and not only do I understand, I'm also enthusiastic to do it. So the dog actually has a bit of a dopamine spike as well, because it goes, there's the next one, and 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 it's predictive that the end is coming up and the reward is imminent. So backward chaining, let's say, for example, if I taught a skill, let's say, for example, to jump on a table. Okay, so that was the last skill that I wanted the dog to do, but it's the first thing that I teach the dog to do. So I teach the dog to jump up on a table. So I might get the dog to jump up on the table and sit down. So once I do that, once I've done and mastered that skill, I'm ready to move on to the next skill. So I've already got that. I've got the dog to jump up on there on cue, and I can use a cue for that. I can dump all these cues after a period of time and have one command and have the dog perform the whole sequence. But it's important while I'm teaching it, the dog has some familiarity and I have some established cue with it that the dog understands how to do it. Because I may independently want to do that in the future and just have a cue for that so the dog knows to do it. So I have a cue for that. The dog understands that. Get up on the table, sit down. Then the next thing I want to teach the dog to do is go up and down an A-frame. Okay, so I teach all the refinement of going up and down the A-frame. So I teach the dog to go up on the A-frame, down the other side, okay, and we've just been focusing solely on that exercise for a period of time. However, the dog is now doing it beautifully, and I want to introduce getting up on the table and sitting down. So what do? The dog has been used to going up the A-frame, going down the other side, getting clicked and rewarded, because that's a skill that we've set aside in part of the sequence. Okay, when we're shaping behaviors, think of it as a link in the chain. When we're actually teaching the dog to do it, we go up the A-frame, down the other side, up the A-frame, down the other side, reward, 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 every single time. But now, what we've done is the table has appeared. So the dog goes up the A-frame, down the other side, I don't hit the clicker. And what does the dog do? It looks at the table and goes, oh, of course, I need to get up on the table. And if it doesn't, a little assistance from you isn't a problem at all. In fact, I would encourage it. However, the dog sees the table now. It goes up the A-frame, down the other side, sees the table, realizes it hasn't been clicked. It attempts to do the behavior. And even sometimes the dog attempting to do it, like running to the table, I can click and treat the dog for that as well. So because the dog knew that it should have done it, I can click and treat the dog. Or if the dog is intuitive and it already jumps up and sits down on the table, I can click and jackpot the dog. And that way the dog goes, fantastic, absolutely figured it out. So every exercise that we start to teach, so we can do a dog walk, we can do weaving poles, like a whole, I'm using agility as an example. I know agility people would say, that's not how you do agility. This is not, I'm not using agility as the be all and end all here. But what I am saying is that we do agility, and we're doing it in a sequence like that as a back chaining example. The dog will see the preceding exercise and go, I have familiarity in that. I know how to do that. I'm excited. I'm getting towards the end. That means that I'm going to get rewarded when I get to that final stage. However, Dancing Bear didn't allow me to do that. Just before I get to that, just a simple explanation that I often use when we talk about shaping. Shaping each criteria is essential, like I've just gone through with that agility explanation. So they're links in the chain. Once I have one link that's established on one side and another link that's established on one side, so let's say this link here is the table, okay, and the completion of getting up there and sitting down on that table, and this link is the A-frame, okay, these are the two exercises that are going to be linked together. Once I have those two, I can form a chain between the two of them. Okay, so these are two exercises that need to happen in that sequence now. So up the A-frame and then jump onto the table and sit down. So I've got links in a chain now that have been established. And I can add links to that and grow my chain out further and further and further. So the same thing when you look at a correction chain. The example that I often use in NDTF is one stage of correction chain. Okay, used to be a solid piece of extruded metal that was probably about 5 meters long, just a bit of metal that was really thin sitting on a rack, and the machine cuts it up, chops it up, turns it into shapes, and it bonds it together. Okay, so when you look at that, you've got 2 O-rings and you've got the links of a chain in between it. And when we've finished with it, when we're finally done with the correction chain, we don't look at it and describe it as 1, 2, 3, 50 little links and 2 O-rings. We just call it a name. So we give it a name. So eventually, when you're starting to tell the dog to do this, if you're using reverse chaining or back chaining to do an exercise, you can give the dog one command, and if the dog understands the sequence and understands how to finish, the dog will roam through the whole exercise and do it all. So now let's go to forward chaining, which is the one where I had to teach Ladybug the concept of forward chaining, how to understand that. So with forward chaining, what I needed to do was teach her the skill, and I had to use luring to actually teach her what that is. And I think we should just jump on that quickly so I can talk to you about the meaning of luring as well. So I'm going to pop that up on screen. And luring, capturing and molding, these terms are regularly used in training systems. Luring is the use of a desirable direct reward that is used to attract a dog into any position. Like most training practices, it will need to be faded over time to an indirect reward method. Let's say, for example, I've been working with Ladybug and it was jumping onto the ball. I've got the ball here. I'm just going to reach over and grab that for a second. So this is the ball that I've been using in training. Okay. So one thing I want you to notice, if you look at that, okay, this is a medicine ball. I believe it's 5 kilos. Okay, for US, that'll be converted into whatever crazy imperial system you use. Go metric, guys. Okay, 2 kgs. All right, but what I did want to show you was that bottom part there, this part here, that flattens out when I put it on the table. So when I rest it on the ground or the table or wherever it is, it doesn't move around too much. If this is perfectly rounded, it will roll around all over the place, okay? And it will start to form a very uneven base. It will often encourage the dog to see this as being a negative or reversive, because the dog will jump on top of it and it will become quite concerned about its welfare of falling off it or rolling off it, much like we would. Okay, most times we need to build up courage around doing exercise like this before we do that. So this is why when I was doing this exercises, I wanted to find a heavy ball, something with weight behind it. Okay, not something that would just bounce along the ground or roll or just flip out as soon as the dog jumped on top of it. But so once we started to teach the dog how to shape or free shape to this ball. Okay, she was running over towards it and running back towards me when I click her. Okay, so for example, she'd run over to the ball, I click her, she'd run back to me and get her reward. What I did want to do after a period of time, once we were establishing this behavior and we're teaching her all the behaviors associated around this, when it was time to actually start teaching her to get onto the ball, what I needed to do was introduce a base. So this was the base that we were using. Okay, and you'll see that in some of the videos I'm about to put up and the tutorial I'm going to go through with her, or with you and her, okay, on how we actually did that. So obviously the ball goes inside there, so it would look something like that. So now that we have covered off a little bit about how this system works, how we actually got the ball to sit inside this is something that we use for shaping as well. A lot of you, when you're seeing the dogs using rear end awareness, we use these on the ground upside down like this. It's a fantastic tool that we can also utilize in a lot of shaping exercises as well. So we were talking before about the use of, I'm just going to pop this on the ground. We were talking before about the use of forward chaining and how it had an impact on what we were doing here and what actually is forward chaining. So the very first exercise I started to teach Bug to do when we were talking about the concept of luring before was she was doing this little thing where she was dancing around on her back leg. So I'd get food or some sort of treat for her and we were just mucking around in the kitchen or the living room. So I'd get this, she'd start walking around on her back legs. At this point in time, as I said before, I had no vision or a plan or goal that I was actually going to form this into a skill. That came a little bit later. So I started doing that, and when she was walking around, my wife and I were joking that she looked like a little dancing bear, and that was quite ironic because if many of you know who Bart Bellin is, in his school he often talks about how gypsies taught bears to dance, so they'd call it the dancing bear. So it was kind of, as I said before, it was kind of ironic that we were talking about this because she looked like a little bear, and we'd been learning about the dancing bear with Bart. So it was just one of those coincidental things. But that was the cue that we started to form with it over a period of time, that when she was walking on her back legs, we'd start saying dancing bear, we'd click her and reinforce her. So after a period of time, I'd give her the cue. And again, when you're talking about cue association, when you're starting to pair cues with behaviours, you've heard us probably on the Canine Paradigm talking about it on a regular basis, where we've been saying don't name it till you love it. When I started to see that she had a strong association with that behaviour, she was predicting that it was coming up, and she was starting to do it at 9 times, 10 out of 10 times, I would start introducing the cue to her. So in NDTF we call that the 90% rule. We pair the cue when the dog is 90% reliable in the behaviour. So after a period of time, I'd say to her, dancing bear, she'd come up on her back legs. I didn't have to lure her anymore. She started to understand, this is the concept, this is what gets me reward, this is where my advantage lies. No problems. Bang, I'd click her, she'd get rewarded. So this is going on regularly. We were doing it on different services in different areas. I'd take her out into NDTF groups just so she would be doing the behaviour in front of a group of people that she didn't know in an unfamiliar area. So what we started to do was going through teaching, training and proofing stages of the exercise, teaching her how to do it, training her how to do it, so then she had to become operant in it, understanding the concept of if you do it, there are rewards. If you don't do it, there are punishes. Punishes in this case being that she was negatively punished, either taken to a place where she didn't want to be, like kicked outside, or that she would have the food stopped. Usually the first thing was the food would stop, which was, for her, she's greedy, believe me. You know, you've got no idea how much that dog wants to eat, which is fantastic. I should also say, as a little side note here too, that having the right type of dog for these behaviours is also ideal as well. There's a lot of times where people attempt to do things like this with their dogs, and they get discouraged or disheartened because they think it's something that's wrong with them. And I often see people that are trying to do dog sports, or they're trying to get themselves involved in something. Sometimes you need to have the right dog for it. It's a reason why a lot of people go out and seek dogs, especially when they're in agencies where they absolutely need those dogs, or they're crazy sports people who all they want to do is do sporting dog things all the time. If they don't have that dog, they're not a competitor. They won't have a chance. They won't have a crack at getting the ribbons or winning first place. They just won't get what they need to get. So they have to have the right type of dog. Fortunately with Ladybug, she's very greedy, she's very drivey. It makes everything very easy for me when I'm trying to teach her these type of things. If I wanted her to be a PSA dog or something like that, she would probably enjoy having a go at it. I'd probably kill her because she's a brachiocephalic and she'd overheat. So it wouldn't be advisable. So right dog, right choices. These things have to be thought of all the time when you're doing these type of things as well. So getting back onto forward chaining, I've digressed from that explanation before. We did start to teach the luring. We're starting to teach her how to do the dancing bear. We completed that. She was doing that quite readily. Then when I sort of started playing around with the ball and I was teaching her to scramble around on the ball, and one thing that she was doing was she was jumping up on the ball and she started to dig at it with her legs. And I thought to myself, maybe I'll just teach her to scramble the ball around, like tri-ball sort of work, where she was pushing the ball around. I was playing with that for a period of time, and she'd scramble the ball all around the living room, and that was quite entertaining and quite funny. However, that's when I needed that prop, because I then started to think to myself, what if I could actually get her up on the ball and get her up like a circus dog to stand on her back legs, and maybe, I don't know, if she could move the ball or if she could just get up there and balance on the ball. Wouldn't that be interesting? And that's when the goal started, and that's when I started to realise there's a possibility that I could possibly do this. First of all, I needed to teach her how to get up on the ball, and that was painstaking. That was absolutely that was an education for both me and my wife. Narelle thought it was very frustrating watching me trying to get her up there. She was often perplexed about the fact that why didn't I do this and why didn't I do that? And it coincides with something that we talk about a lot when we're talking about training, is having patience. And I find that patience is something that you need to exercise religiously when you're training dogs, because it doesn't always go your way, and sometimes you just have to know. This is when we revert back to the explanation before of learning incremental stages in training. This is very important. You need to be patient. And when I'm starting to show you some of the videos that we were jumping in and out before, you will see that some of these videos only go for 40 seconds or maybe a minute or thereabouts. In fact, I actually calculated the actual time in hours that took me, because it took me about 2 months in total to teach her to complete the exercise as to what she's doing it now. So it was a 2-month span. It was about 2.5 to 3 hours of total time that we've spent on it. So that will give you an indication over that duration of time. So that's allotments of 1 minute to 5 minute ratios, and it would entirely depend on the day of how long we would actually go for. So sometimes we might go for 5 seconds, sometimes we might go for 30 seconds, sometimes we might go for a minute, but that was definitely dependent on the energy levels that she had, because I didn't want to exceed my explanation that I've told you guys on the Canine Paradigm before. If you've ever heard me saying it, no more, one more time. That's the best way to burn the dog out. That's the best way to turn something positive into an aversive straight away. That's a surefire path of teaching the dog where the advantage doesn't lie. And if you hear Pat talking about killing hope, that's when dogs start realizing this is hopeless, it's not fun, it's aversive, I want to get out of this. I don't want the dog to have that mindset at all. I want the dog to be pestering me. And in fact, she pestered me quite a lot when she wanted to. Now when she wants to do the exercise, she comes and bounces all over me and harasses me. She's saying, it's her way of saying to me, I want to do the exercise. So as soon as she knows that, even when you start seeing some of these footage, you're seeing that she starts to see the camera as a cue. Like when the camera is set up, she's running over to the camera and she's like pulling her face right in front of the camera. And it's quite entertaining. Well, it was for me anyway. It was quite entertaining to watching her learn and starting to establish a mindset that when the camera is being set up, that also means that the behavior is going to be set up as well. So connecting it all together in my very long-winded, rambly discussion of how forward chaining, or how this forward chaining event played out. So we had her doing dancing bear without the ball. Okay, so she would get up on her back legs and dance around all over the place. A lot of fun. After a period of time, I was teaching her how to get up on the ball. So once she got up on the ball, there was no way that she knew in her mindset that now that I'm up on the ball, I should do dancing bear. So I kind of had to reteach her how to do it all over again, because then there's the aspect of balance. Then what I had to teach her was that once you're up in this position, now I have to lure you up and be able to get you up in that position. So that was quite a challenge in itself. For me, that was quite an education, because I got to see her learning her own little strategies, which she was actually trying to readjust her legs in the right spot so she could correct her balance. And as soon as I started to see that, I've got some videos which I'll show you as well, and she adjusts her legs in the right position. As soon as she does that, I just click her and reinforce her for that. So I wanted her to know that because she'd actually thought about this and she put a bit of cognition into what she was doing, I wanted her to know that that was something that I found valuable, and I wanted to pay her for that. So there's a few things that she was doing which I learned a lot about, which was great as well, is even when she was on the ball and she was stretching right out towards it and she was getting her back legs right in, but this is before she actually got on top of it, she'd push her back legs up right up to it, and I'd be able to click her and mark her against that. And that's things that you need to look for as a trainer. You need to be able to see these little incremental pathways that you can actually, they're little nuances that when I was talking about before of chunking things down, that you need to see in your training and think to yourself, man, that's exactly what I need to be patient and waiting for the dog to do. And that's why I said it doesn't matter if you're stretching it out over time. If you're doing this for movies and you've got a time frame, well, you better get cooking. You might need to be doing multiple sessions a day, but you need to also make sure you've got the right dog for that as well. So once I got her up on the ball and once she was balancing nicely, then I was able to go back to luring again. So I'd get a treat in my hand, I'd put it right above her nose, and I'd start to just get her to lift her head up. Okay, and all I was doing was incrementally starting to teach her to bring her head up, and I'd click her and I'd mark her a clicker, and I'd reward her for that behaviour straight away. After a period of time, what she started to realise was this is familiar to the dancing bear exercise that we'd ingrained so hard onto her, that she started to realise maybe I need to take over a little bit from this and come up into the air and chase after the reward a little bit. And the minute I got that off her, the first time she did that, as you all should always do, I marked her and jackpotted her straight away. So she realised I'm going to get a big payment for doing this or even attempting to do this. Again, I'm not asking for the completed behaviour because she doesn't understand it. So this is where forward chaining, this is the whole long explanation of where forward chaining comes into play. It was a really good example for me to learn forward chaining. I've taught forward chaining on teaching dogs to push lawnmowers and trolleys and all sorts of things like that before, where you can't teach them the end behaviour, they have to learn it on the fly. So they have to understand, now that I'm up here, what's next, and then you teach them the next behaviour, hence forward chaining, okay, because you have to chain it forward. They can't see it predictively. They still get it, trust me, they still get it. If they know the prediction in it and they understand where their advantage lies, and we use that quite frequently. Conrad Most was the guy who originally came up with that pathway, which was the abbreviated version of the sharp contrast between the agreeable and the disagreeable teaches a dog where its advantage lies, and when you do this correctly, the dog will learn very quickly. So that was the sharp contrast of being very agreeable for Ladybug, which she was starting to learn it very quickly. She was understanding my advantage lies in getting up on this ball and starting to lift myself up into the air. So once again, when she was starting to do this, I started to reintroduce and pair the command dancing bear with her. So when she was up, getting up there, I was able to say dancing bear, mark her, treat her, and we were sequentially getting her to do the behaviour. And after that, the behaviour was born. She started to understand that. But then what I have to discuss is the concept of fading out direct reinforcement. Okay, so direct reinforcement is the lure. Okay, I have to fade out the reliability that's always going to be there, because I don't want her to see that and think, now I'm only going to work if a lure is presented. What she has to understand is, after a period of time, once the behaviour has been established and the mindset has been established and the cue has been connected to the behaviour, after a period of time, what I wanted to realise is that that lure is not going to be presented anymore. Okay, so you start incrementally fading it out. The dog starts to realise it's not in your hands anymore. Okay, it's reliant on the behaviour being done, the work being done. Okay, and the dog gets excited about this when it understands it has the opportunity to do it. It won't see it as a problem as long as it understands and it reliably predicts, if I do the work, I will get paid. Okay, there is hope in getting that, in having that happen for me. So I needed her to understand that. Once she did understand that, she was reliably doing that behaviour for me on an ongoing basis. So what I did want to go back to in the terms used in training is the matrix of motivation. I'm just going to bring that up on screen as well, so we can just quickly nut through that. This is something if you're a trainer, if you've been involved in the canine industry for a period of time, you would have seen this quite regularly. You certainly would have seen it in discussion groups and whatever. It is positive reinforcement plus R, positive punishment plus P, negative reinforcement, negative R, negative punishment, negative P. So this is a matrix that we consistently dip in and out of. We spin it like a spinning wheel when we're doing training. It's relentlessly used in and around training. Even people who say they don't use aspects of this are kidding themselves. They can't help it. It occurs naturally. It occurs in nature. It occurs whether it's in the home, whether you intend to do it or not. Okay, it occurs on an ongoing basis, even when you're not home and your dogs are by themselves in the backyard. There'll be plenty of examples of things that happen in this matrix. The point is that knowing it and knowing the concepts of what they mean and how to apply them is very powerful in our training aspect. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that because we've talked whole lessons on that before. There's a lot of information out there and you should be able to gather that up as well. And the last thing I did want to go through is the termination cue. So this means a lot of different things for a lot of different people, and this is argued quite extensively around the point. Some people say using the clicker is a termination cue. When I click this, it means stop what you're doing, come back and get reward. No problem. My termination cue to my dog when I'm doing training is I do click and I want her to come over, and I want her to understand that this means you're getting paid. So this is basically a cue to get paid. It does mean she can stop what she's doing and come over and get paid, but also wanted my understanding of a termination cue is saying it's over, we're done, we're finished working. Okay, so I just simply use the word finished. So in some of the videos you'll hear me say that. I'll just say to her finished while she's being fed, so that way she's not expecting to see the ball and continue to do work. She just knows I've done enough, I got paid, I pay her well, we've done the exercise, we're done, so she can move on from there. So it's just permission for me to say, okay, we're knocking off, we're done. If you want to use that terminology differently and it means something else to you, that's fine, no problem. And if you want to use different terms that I've used, again, no problem at all. All right, so I just want to quickly go through some of the videos so we can have a look and see some of the things that she's done so you can watch what's going on along the way.
So this video is going to move fairly quickly. This is just a very short one when we first started. We're going to move straight into, this is probably a couple of days apart. We're starting to get good reliability in the behaviour. I'd probably done about 4 sessions of just this behaviour, and it was continuous schedule of reinforcement. What that means is that she was continually doing the same behaviour and I'm marking her for the behaviour. However, any time that she's showing a little bit more strength in the behaviour, and I can jackpot her for showing strength in those behaviours, and then I can even push her further in behaviour by going from a continuous schedule of reinforcement to an intermittent or a variable schedule of reinforcement, which you have to do to encourage and force the behaviour to change the direction. What I mean by the direction is change the intensity of the behaviour. So if you watch that very first video, if you rewind or you recall it in your mind, you would notice that Ladybug was just merely pushing at the ball. Her initial free shaping exercise when she first started this was coming in the room and just simply looking at it. Now what I've asked her to do is start pushing and driving at the ball a little bit more in each session. No behaviour there, no reward. So you can see quite a bullish behaviour there. Sometimes she gets quite frustrated, which is good. This is what the variable or the intermittent schedule encourages in behaviour. You can start seeing that the dog will get a little bit more pushy. People worry about stress in behaviour sometimes. I don't worry about stress at all, as long as I'm not overstressing the dog. A little bit of stress, if you ever hear Robert Sapolsky talk about it, is very important in training. Actually encourages the dog to be a little bit more prepared and robust in training.
That's it.
And you can see me just there with my nice white legs as I've walked onto camera. You can see me that I've just jackpotted her for the behaviour and we've finished that session. It's going to move into the next one. So once again, we're starting a new behaviour, and again, as previous sessions and as all sessions that you're going to see in this little presentation of all these little random film clips that I'm putting on, this is just the progressive forward continuation of her doing the behaviour. It all leads into the end behaviour. So during this time, as you heard me speak about initially, I had no idea that this was going to morph into the Dancing Bear project. This was simply her moving the ball, and I was thinking to myself, well, if she's moving the ball like this, maybe I could get her to scramble around on the ball, which she started doing. And then when she started scrambling around on the ball, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe I can get her to walk on the ball. That would be an interesting project. Again, a few more little traps on the ground. Okay, I put a few toys around her doing the behaviour. If she goes for the toys, it ends the session. And some people might say, well, that's a little bit unfair. She's fairly new in the behaviour. Well, she's not in my mind. In my mind, she was doing the behaviour quite nicely, so I put them down. If she goes for them, that's it. Good. We just pick up the ball and end the session. And that to her is quite a huge punishment. If she was too distracted by those toys, I wouldn't have put them down initially. Yes, however,
good girl. There you go.
What I like to do is I like to make sure that we've got a continuance in the behaviour that I'm trying to encourage, which is pushing the ball around and starting to drive it around a little bit more. And again, we've just jackpotted because the behaviour was to satisfaction. You might notice too at this point in time that I've got no cue. So there's no real developmental stage or nothing that she's doing in particular that I wanted to cue at this point in time. I will add a cue later on. You'll hear me add the cue to the behaviour as she starts to improve in what she's doing. Now, you can hear me saying good girl as well randomly throughout some of these clips. Some people would say, what's the point of that? There is no point to that after I've already done the clicker. This has been discussed on regular forums where people have talked about after you do the marking, should you say good girl or should you do this or should you do that? There's a great debate to say what's the point. The clicker is a secondary reinforcer indicating that the primary reinforcer is on its way. Everything else that comes after that is just supplementary. Good. So for me, I guess it's for myself. I don't mind communicating with my dog along the way. And that, of course, is my choice. Also, other people who believe that there is reason to do this. Now, that was interesting. I just wanted to talk about that little point there where she jumped up in front of camera. Now she starts to realise that the camera being in the room and the camera being in that position means that these opportunities are going to start presenting themselves. So it starts to become a cue itself that the behaviour is about to occur. Now, if you don't want that to happen, which in most cases you probably don't, is make sure that the camera is set up well ahead of time and it becomes neutral stimuli, or set it up before you bring the dog into the room. So I noticed, and I didn't notice it along the way, and this is where how science is created through the art of observation. I noticed while I was setting it up, she was watching me and she started to realise the camera is there, and I started to see her behaviour become quite upbeat. So it was the start of the dopamine cycle, just seeing the camera in the room. Now, as you can see, after I've been waffling on for all this period of time, you can start to see her moving the ball around, starting to actually get it to move out of position, which is, again, it's part of the progress, what I'm asking her for. I'm not asking her to dig. So she was digging at the ball. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to actually move it, not just scratch the ball in position. So anything less than that is not a behaviour that I want to reinforce. So if it's not strong enough, she's kind of checking in there, which is normal, like thinking, oh, that I've done enough. But that's up for me to decide, not the dog. She will try and cut as many corners as she possibly can. That's the opportunistic way of a dog to try and perform those shortcuts. However, it's up to the trainer to teach the dog correctly. And this is why I keep preaching the importance of small increments in what we're doing in training. Sometimes I'll go a couple of steps backwards if I think that that is going to progress the dog more steps forward. Some people think that that is a problem if you actually have to go a couple of steps backwards. I don't see that as being a problem. So if it's called 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That's probably the best way to look at it. So I've given a little jackpot there as I was satisfied with the behaviour that she was giving me at the time. The nice thing is even after a jackpot, she's not sitting there looking at me for food. She's thinking, well, the food is dried up. It's time to get back in the behaviour and start getting paid. And she went straight back into it in a nice fashion. So again, that's where you wrap up the behaviour. Sometimes it will go for 10 seconds. Sometimes it will go for 5 minutes.
Ball. Good girl. Ball.
You can hear me starting to use a cue now. I'm starting to say ball. So at some stage along the line, I've been satisfied with the strength of the behaviour, and you can see that when I'm saying it, she's actually initialising the behaviour.
Very good.
Or initiating the behaviour.
Ball.
That was a nice one. Nice little scramble. She can do better than that, though, and I know she's capable of doing that, and that's the art of a good handler slash trainer.
Girl.
There you go. That was the one I was after.
Very good. Finished.
All of this, whatever you're doing in your training, it is actually an art form because it's fundamentally like sculpting, for example. All right, this is a bit of a long-ass session, this one. So we're going to go through this as it's a bit of an endurance exercise. I've actually shortened a little bit out of this. But what I did want you to watch in this exercise is there is a lot of frustration going on here for both Ladybug and myself. You can see her slipping all over the ball. Now, what I'm using here is the little marker pad. It's a trough feeder or a stock feeder that you can buy at horse shops. Michael Ellis and other very smart trainers like to use these little devices. They use them to train rear end awareness. They use them to train going to place. They teach them, so you can use this between your legs to teach go to place. If you wish, you can teach them to use for healing, again for rear end awareness. There's a lot of wonderful things you can use them for, and it just so happens I had a size that would fit my ball like an egg cup would fit an egg. I was quite pleased with myself for finding this, and what I've done is place it in position, because now what I'm trying to do is not teach her to scramble around on the ball anymore, which is a behaviour that I'm trying to make go extinct. Occasionally, she would try that behaviour because she thought that that was the behaviour to do, and we progressed beyond that. That didn't take long at all, actually. I was quite pleased with the fact that she moved past that. So now what we've done is fix the ball in position by placing it in that stock feeder or that marker pad, whatever you want to call it. And as it's fixed, she understood that there's no reason to start scratching and trying to move it anymore because it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't performing the same routine that it was doing before, so I'm not getting rewarded for doing that. But what I am getting rewarded for now is putting my legs up close to the rim of it, and that's why I wanted to show you this camera angle to show you what I was actually doing here. And this was a very frustrating time for Narelle, my wife, when she was watching this, because she kept saying to me, why don't you just lift her legs up? Why don't you place her in position? And my answer to her was at that stage, well, I could do that. I possibly could do that. However, what I wanted to do is go through the struggle of learning this herself, because I'll get a lot of strength in the behaviour. The struggle would create more permanency in my mind and teach her better balance. If she can learn this herself, if she can learn to get up on the ball and hold the ball herself, she will learn the exercise a lot better. That was going through my mind. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm going to go with that for now. So what I did want you to see when she's doing this exercise is there's a couple of times where I didn't mark the exercise where I should have, because I was looking at one side and not the other. I didn't notice that at one stage she did a really beautiful leg lift, and I actually missed the sequence. Hopefully, I think that might be coming up shortly. Let's just watch here and pay attention to a few of the behaviours that she's doing. Now, I'm luring her too, by the way, when we're doing this exercise.
I won't be in it, will I?
Nope. Unless you talk, like you did before.
That's me and my wife having a conversation. There's a little bit too much dog arseholery going on in this scene. You have to forgive Ladybug, she's not bashful, and this only lasts for about another minute or so before we move on. Sorry about that. That's a great angle, however, as you can see, her pushing her rear legs right up to it. And there we can start to see the progress of the legs starting to really try and come up onto the ball. As you can see there, as I'm luring her, she's really straining forward and she's starting to lift her back legs up, which is exactly what I'm going for. I'm trying to teach her. She just doesn't get it this period of time. She doesn't know what I want. That's the one I missed. That was the one I was talking about before, the one I missed. The one I really, really would have liked to have captured, because that would have been a pinnacle in that moment. But it's no big deal. as long as you don't make that an ongoing occurrence. The problem for you is if you keep missing those opportunities. The reason I missed that one, as I was saying before, is I was looking at her other leg, and I missed that leg coming up like that. But as long as you get it again, or just move back in your expectation. So don't make your expectation too high. Anytime you're doing any incremental work, you've just got to make sure that you're moving to a standard that the dog understands and can maintain at its level of training at the time. That's one of the most important things that people really need to grasp. Again, this is a longer clip. This is a bit more of a frustrating one. There we go. Nice little leg lifts. Timing is crucial when you're doing any type of marker work, when you're using your clickers or whatever you're using. You just got to make sure you get it as close to the behavior that you're trying to encourage as you possibly can. Not asking too much, not having unrealistic expectations in what you're doing. It's where people really lose. Look at that. Now, I managed to get the mark in before she belly slid across the ball.
Get up. Come on, get up.
I have so many students, unbelievable amount of students who ring me on the phone when they're early days doing these exercises or show me clips of what they're doing. The reason they're finding...
Good.
She's getting quite frustrated here too while I'm talking about this. Reason why they're having a lot of frustration and trouble in the success of what they're doing is they're just asking too much too soon from the dog. Now, you might be saying to me, but Glenn, this is a huge lesson with the dog. She had a lot of gas in her tank when we're doing this exercise. This is why we kept progressing with it. This is why we kept pushing forward with it, because she wanted to. And you can start to see her legs lifting up, and I probably missed that one too because I was looking at the other side. Here we go. Watch this. This is important. Nice little pops up there. We're coming towards the end. And she's going to have a strong finish here. So this is a little bit of a superstitious behaviour. All right, laying down on the ball and trying to scratch at it. It's an old behaviour that we were making go extinct. And wait, there we go. Beautiful.
Good girl.
And that's what we finished on. And you have to know when to say when. Now, watch, because we had that good session, this was the next day. So look at this. Look at the activity in her rear end. She's starting to understand what it is that I require now. She doesn't quite get it. That's why she can't do it. But she's really, really trying. And these are fantastic breakthrough sessions. After she chokes. I'm still luring. I still need to lure at this point in time, because if I stop luring here, she just wouldn't do the behavior for me. So direct reinforcement at this point in time. I'll go indirect later. I'll fade this away. I have to. Otherwise, she'll keep expecting the same thing. Look at that. Look at that beautiful strength in the behavior where she's really starting to paddle those rear legs up. So I'm getting nice rear end awareness here as we're starting to go through the exercise. Nice. And when I get a real push for her, when I know she's capable of doing better, that's when I mark the behavior. This is the breakthrough day. This is the first day that she stood up on the ball on camera and you get to see it. So she's going through the same struggle that she went through before, and boom, there we go. That was it. That was the first time she actually did the behavior for me. And she's going to repeat it again. Now she knows what to do. Her neurons are firing. She's starting to create new pathways in her brain. Now she understands how to do the behavior. It was all worth it. All that struggle that we had to go through, all that endurance that you had to watch for this. This is the start of Dancing Bear. This is how we started to push her into behavior. First of all, I had to teach her how to be stable on that ball, how to understand how to make her muscles work. Her brain has to come to terms with it. The neuro pathways have to be developed. Her muscular system needs to learn how to coordinate and learn balance in all the right areas that we're doing here. This was a NDTF day. This was a couple of days later. We had the NDTF block 1 there, and I was showing the students how to shape behaviour. So they have to do certain skills themselves. I was just showing them something that I'm working on with Ladybug. She's been in this room before, so I have had her exposed to this room before, and we have done the exercise in this room before. Once I get reliability in an exercise, I'll take the dog out into different areas, different places, so I can start proof the exercise in different places. Doesn't mean I'd finished entirely yet, like I hadn't got Dancing Bear, but I got her standing on the ball. So because that was a signature part of the skill, I wanted to make sure we were developing a strong mindset of the behaviour there. And this was the first day that she got to perform in front of a crowd. I was also explaining to the students what my long-term plan and goal was with this exercise. That way they could better understand where this was all going to and get an idea of how it all fits together. So we could explain the whole forward chaining aspect to them and the progressions that you need to make in order to get the exercise. Get over your choke first. Take your time.
We're saving that one.
But up. 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 There's that little superstitious behaviour again. It was a behaviour that we're trying to make it. That came from something I must have rewarded, or something that she felt rewarded by, where she'd put her head down and bow on top of the ball. Doesn't matter if she does it. She just can never be rewarded for it. The minute I reward her for it, it's all over. So, that's up. This is the start of Dancing Bear.
Girl. Dancing Bear.
It's a couple of days into it. I shouldn't say it's the start. Okay. It's a couple of days into the exercise. We'd already been luring her back into position, getting her to lift her head and strain upwards.
Good.
Then when she started to realise, hey, this is the same thing that you've been luring me on the ground when I've been walking on my hind legs, because that's what we started with. We started teaching her this when we were doing the forward chaining of the exercise, was to teach her how to do, first of all, how to walk on her rear legs, and then we started to get her up on the ball, and then when we started to lure her up in a position, she could start to see the familiarity, and this is where the chain came from. We're able to pair the two behaviours together. There we go. Yeah, beautiful. And she got jackpotted for that.
Finished.
That was the strongest performance that she gave me in that behaviour. And look at her now. Now she's got her wings.
Dancing Bear.
So I was able to fade the lure and just get it on cue. She knows if I want that food that you've got in your hand. Beautiful.
Dancing Bear.
And no doubt you've also seen it on the Canine Paradigm. And this is one of the final things. This is not only recently when we did it for Christmas shoot. Hope you enjoyed Dancing Bear. Thanks, guys.
Okay, if you've survived all that, then now you know how to teach the Dancing Bear. Hopefully it will give you some inspiration to either teach it yourself or come up with a fun skill that you enjoy doing with your own dog. The main emphasis is to do something you enjoy, have fun with your dog. That's the main reason I do it, is because it's fun. As I said before, it's great shits and giggles, have a great laugh with it. And it also it helps improve my bond with my dog. So I'd encourage you to do the same thing as well. Find something you enjoy doing, teach your dog, whether you're doing dog sports, agility, you name it, whatever it is, get out there and do something fun. Amaze yourself. I often encourage the NDTF students, do something crazy, do something that somebody has never done before. There's a lot of skills. If you want to see somebody who does some really kick-ass, amazing things out there with some funny skills that are very entertaining, and they also do it for movies and so forth, is Omar Van Mueller. So he taught the original Jumpy. Jumpy passed away a while ago, but Omar's been doing it with a myriad of other dogs, and I always admire his skills. There's another guy in, I think he's in San Francisco or California, Francis Metcalf. He does a lot of circus dog tricks, and he encourages people to learn and do the same. Get out there and mentor under people who do those type of things as well. If you want to know more about it, you can contact me. I can go through with you. We can set up a Skype, and I can do a lesson plan with you or something like that. I can help you out with it. So let me know. Enjoy, people. Thanks for hanging out. Hope it was entertaining and worthwhile. Thanks again.